So just a few quick slides with the classic disclosure. So BioCardia is focused on heart failure, and it's an enormous problem in our society where the heart loses its pumping capabilities that many are very familiar with. We're focusing in on the heart failure that develops after a heart attack, the ischemic heart failure, and we're focusing on the patients who are in the middle of the road, the New York Heart Association Class 2 and 3 patients. So that's about 1.7 million patients in the United States. We have a selection diagnostic strategy that we are working to develop in which we select patients who have potent cells for therapy. This excludes about 30% of the patients from that 1.7 million that we can target with the ongoing program. And we are today in a phase 3 pivotal trial with the CardiAmp cell therapy. One of the biomarkers we look at in our bone marrow-based therapy is the CD34 cell counts. And with that and a number of other biomarkers, we have created a means to identify the patients we believe are most likely to respond to therapy. It enhances the quality control around the therapy, but it really solves the problem of autologous cell therapy variability from patient to patient by enhancing the characteristics of the therapy. At the same time, it minimizes the cost of therapy from a selected processed cell therapy. So essentially, we're selecting patients for therapy and providing an autologous, minimally processed point-of-care cell therapy instead of selecting cells. And we think this is attractive to physicians, payers, and patients. So the therapy primarily involves selecting patients and then proceeding with the 3-step procedure of cell harvest, processing, and delivery. And this is all done in a single procedure. The cell collection takes about 20 minutes, and we pull 60 cc's of bone marrow mononuclear cells. The cell processing takes about 23 minutes, and it's done in a FDA-cleared and CE-marked platform that we have global exclusive rights to. And then the cells are delivered with the most highly efficient delivery platform that involves advancing a hollow helical needle that screws into the myocardium and delivers the cells right around the infarct zone. The phase 2 results that we have in this therapy for these cells and this indication are quite compelling. On this graphic, it shows you the results relative to a number of other approved device-based therapies for heart failure. And what you're seeing here is the 6-minute walk endpoint, which is one of the endpoints we met in our phase 2 randomized placebo-controlled trial. Here, we're showing that the 6-minute walk readout, the primary endpoint for the phase 3 trial, is substantially better than that for most of the cardiac resynchronization therapy trials. In addition, the patients that we treated in this trial, about 50% of them already had cardiac resynchronization therapy on board. And the last slide I have is where we're going ahead. So the CardiAmp cell therapy in ischemic heart failure is advancing today in a pivotal trial in the United States. It's a trial that qualifies for registration. The next significant milestone we're anticipating is the efficacy data readout in Q3 from the rolling cohort and completion of full enrollment in the randomized controlled trial by the end of Q2 2019. We also have a second pivotal program using this therapy in chronic myocardial ischemia. We're anticipating Medicare reimbursement of this program in likely this quarter. And if that comes through and with sufficient financing, we anticipate enrolling first patient in this trial at the end of this year. In addition to the CardiAmp therapy, we have a mesenchymal therapy we call CardiAllo. It's also moving forward apace, and it follows our 3 phase 1/2 trials that we've performed also in heart failure with co-sponsored mesenchymal stem cell programs, both auto and allo, and head-to-head studies that have led to what we're doing today in CardiAllo. So that's a snapshot on BioCardia. And I think I'll leave us at this, because this is the pivotal program.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter. So one thing I wanted to ask you about your pivotal trial. So if you look on cms.gov, you have a Category B investigational device exemption. I was hoping maybe you could just help us understand the implications of that for the execution of the trial and maybe more importantly, the costs of that trial.
Thanks, Steve. So CardiAmp cell therapy is regulated by CBER as a device under an IDE pathway. CMS has granted us a Category B designation. What that means is that CMS pays for the cost of patient screening. They pay for the cost of treatment of those patients. They pay for the product that is being investigated. They pay for the follow-up of those patients as well. So it greatly reduces the cost of running a large pivotal trial. And that value proposition is one we're expecting this quarter for our second pivotal program as well.
Okay, that's helpful. And you announced the design of this trial as well last week. So the primary endpoint, 6-minute walk distance, and MACE as well, 12 months. Maybe you could just walk through the design of that trial, any unique aspects of the statistical plan with regards to the primary endpoint and also secondary endpoints as well.
Happy to do that, Steve. So the paper that just came out, the American Heart Journal publication of the trial design of the CardiAmp heart failure trial, we had a press release just last week. And that trial has a statistical analysis plan that is hierarchical in nature. It has a gatekeeper approach. And that's because this is a pivotal trial. So the endpoint in the trial and the subsequent hierarchical endpoints are designed for approval and product labeling. The primary endpoint is a composite of 6-minute walk and MACE and mortality. And the way it works is the 6-minute walk is the primary driver, but patients lost to follow-up due to MACE or mortality, there's a ranked analysis that's performed. And this type of ranked analysis has been used in other products approved by the FDA in their pivotal programs. The specifics of the analysis in the primary endpoint were developed by Dr. Tom Cook at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's a biostatistician that I can't hold a candle to. His work, he's structured it so that in performing the study, the primary endpoint should have greater than 90% power. And that's the 6-minute walk with the ranked analysis of MACE and mortality. Should we hit that endpoint with a P of less than 0.05, then we will roll down to the first secondary hierarchical endpoint, which is a safety endpoint, and then subsequent endpoints as well, including other efficacy endpoints. Of note, we hit the primary endpoint and the first 3 secondary hierarchical endpoints in our phase 2 trial, which was 1/10 the size of this pivotal trial. So it's significantly overpowered to see efficacy based on the results of our phase 2 trial.
Okay, and one of the things I see on the slide here, so the pre-procedure screening, and you mentioned the cell potency assay that you're employing in this trial. So what are the features of that assay, and can you just talk about the data that was used to inform the construction of that assay, any specifications that are critical, and what it means for both the trial and then the commercialization potentially of that product?
So the CardiAmp cell therapy potency assay is a pre-procedure bone marrow aspirate, a very small 5 cc aspirate that is sent to a core lab, and it's assessed for a number of biomarkers. From those biomarkers, we develop a score, and if a patient meets that criteria, they would advance to therapy. About 30% of the patients will be excluded because they don't meet that criteria. The biomarkers were developed in part based on our phase 1 data sets, where we saw correlation with the certain cell phenotypes with the responsiveness to therapy. And that phase 1 data set was published in Eurointervention in 2011. From there, additional data sets in the field by the National Institute of Health Cardiac Cell Therapy Research Network had similar findings echoing what we had seen. And then other pivotal programs or randomized placebo-controlled programs looking at certain specific cell types were all utilized to develop a signature to maximize the probability of efficacy in this phase 3 program. For commercial, BioCardia in the past has actually created a diagnostics company that's publicly traded, doing gene expression profiling in cardiac transplantation. And so we have some exposure to the nuances of commercializing a high-value esoteric assay, such as the CardiAMP potency assay. But today, the assay is being performed in a CLIA-CAP accredited core laboratory for the trial.
And the 30% cutoff that you mentioned, it seems to me like that's a nice spot for being able to enrich for a healthy size of the patient population. But also provide incentive for using the assay to do so. I'm just curious what feedback you get from clinicians and people that would be using the assay. Are they saying the same thing? Is that the sweet spot? Obviously, if you had an assay that had a cutoff where only 1% were excluded, you might not even have a reason to use it.
Well, we developed it primarily to maximize the potential of efficacy. So it's a selection diagnostic, and the strategy is really to select the patients who really will be the best responders. Over time, we may look at indication expansion. And so the 30% is not selected for any reason other than that is really what's needed to maximize the probability of technical success in the trial. The physician community has been found it attractive that, hey, they're going to be treating patients that really should respond to therapy. And the patients have been responsive to that as well. They like the idea, although they're disappointed if they get screened out, as are the physicians in the trial. Those who are included are very motivated because they believe that they should be responsive to therapy based on all of the data behind us. We also think it has advantages for payers in the future because although we look at the potency assay as selecting the 70% most responsive to therapy, payers view it from the other perspective, which this is a therapy that excludes 30% of the patients from having to undergo the more expensive therapy.
Okay, great. I think we're out of time, so thank you, Peter. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Steve.